Yes, Mr. Stewart.
Your Honour, Father McDermott is back in the witness box. Your Honour, I tender a letter dated 21 August 1987 from BAE to Bishop Ronald Malkerns. I'm not
The letter will be Exhibit 28, 110.
As Your Honour pleases. And that'll come up on the screen, Father. I might proceed with a hard copy in the meanwhile. There's a technical difficulty, Father, as you'll appreciate. I'm sure it'll be resolved shortly. There it is. No, that's... yes, that's it. But it's also on the screen, Father, but you can read it in the hard copy or on the screen. That's up to you. So now in your private hearing, you dealt with the circumstances in which you came to speak with, I'll refer to as Mrs. BAE in Melbourne, is that right?
Yes, that's right.
And you've seen what she has to say about your meeting, and you've had things to say about that, and that's dealt with in that transcript. You will see that after that meeting, she wrote this letter to Bishop Malkerns. You see that?
Yes.
Because she refers in the letter to the meeting she had with you.
Yes.
You see that?
Yes.
Yes. Have you seen this letter before?
No.
Right. So well, I'll take you through the relevant part. I mean, she starts off with greetings and salutations and so on. And then she says, thank you for your message that Father Jerry Ridsdale had been spoken to by you, but I am not satisfied that anything has as yet been resolved. Do you see that?
Yes, I see that.
And then she says, initially Father McDermott suggested we meet so as to see what could be done. This was when I first contacted him as your representative, and again he stated those same words when we met in Melbourne. And then she said, I asked at that time that Father Ridsdale be removed from all contact with young boys, also that BAF's treatment as required by the psychologist, and so it goes on. Now, just dealing with that request, you see that BAE is asking that Ridsdale be removed from all contact with young boys. Do you see that?
Yes.
And was that something that BAE conveyed to you also in the meeting that you and she had?
She did, yes.
And indeed, given what you knew about Gerald Ridsdale at that time, as well as his having offended against her son, BAF, that was a very salutary request, you would agree?
Yes, I would.
Yes. But it wasn't, in fact, done, is that right?
Following this meeting that I had with BAE,
Yes.
when I went back to Ballarat, I wrote a note or a memo to the Bishop saying that I'd met with the person and said that there were two matters, as far as I can recall, that she was asking that something, that action be taken for Ridsdale to, as she said, have any contact with young people or boys. I'd written that. And secondly, she'd asked that there be some sort of recompense to meet some needs that that family had.
Yes.
So I wrote both of those in my handwriting, and as far as I can recall, I left that note on the Bishop's desk. The only feedback I got was sometime later, I'm not sure how long, was that I was told that some action was happening.
Yes, and
So that was by the Bishop who said that.
And do you know what that action was?
I don't know entirely. I do know that some sort of financial arrangement was made. I'm not sure of the details of it.
Okay.
I don't know about what happened then, about him taking action with Ridsdale.
Well, you'll see how this suggests in the second paragraph, the bit that I read, where she writes, "Thank you for your message that Father Ridsdale had been spoken to by you." It rather suggests that the action that was taken in relation to, if I might call it, risk management of Ridsdale as opposed to recompense for expenses and so on, was the Bishop speaking to Ridsdale. Do you see that?
Yes, I know nothing about that.
Yes. And, I mean, that, as one can see, is August 1987. And that was when you would be aware Ridsdale was assistant priest at Horsham.
Yes, I think I would have known that.
And you would know that he didn't leave that position until May of 1988.
Yes.
So it would appear certainly that the Bishop took no stronger action against Ridsdale than to speak to him.
I can't say whether he did or did not.
Yes.
Storminess continues out west once again
I
for...
withdraw that. You of course knew, following...
I can't say whether he did or did not.
Yes. And did you not... Well, I withdraw that. You of course knew, following your meeting with BAE and your report to the Bishop, that Ridsdale continued as assistant priest in Horsham.
As far as I know, yes.
Yes. And did you raise with the Bishop what's being done following the note that you left for him?
The Bishop seemed to deal with these matters himself.
But in this particular instance, you had dealt with it, at least insofar as meeting Mrs. BAE was concerned.
Yes, that was on the request of the Bishop.
Yes, and conveying what she had to say back to the Bishop.
Yes, that's right.
That must have troubled you, that knowing what you knew, Mrs. BAE having told you, and Ridsdale remaining in parish ministry.
It wouldn't have been the type of action I think that I would have taken.
Did it not occur to you that it was something you should perhaps do more about, raise it with the Bishop?
I didn't know who else the Bishop was talking to at that time, who his advisors were on these matters, if any. I had no knowledge of that, so I went about doing my work. I just presumed that whoever he was talking to, taking advice from, that was continuing. But I had no knowledge of that.
You see how it is, Father, that sometimes all it takes for bad things to happen or to thrive is for good people to do nothing. Do you see that? Would you accept that?
As a general principle, yes.
Yes. And would this not be an occasion where a good person like you, should have spoken up?
I think at that stage, perhaps naively, I still had confidence that the authorities would take proper action.
But you could see that no action was being taken that would actually remove Ridsdale
I
from...
couldn't tell you what action was happening.
Well, you were the Bishop's secretary. If Ridsdale had been removed from Horsham or from parish ministry, that would have come to your attention.
Yes, at some stage it would have.
And if we carry on in the letter, you'll see on page 3, right towards the end of the page, do you see in the last paragraph where she writes, but right now, my Lord, do you see that?
Yes.
But right now, my Lord, I find your answers via Father McDermott are inadequate. Therefore, if you are unable to answer my response as to Father McDermott's what can be done, and my answers as required, if not by letter in the immediate future, I ask that you please receive me at your earliest convenience. Now, does that tone strike you in the same way that it does me, Father, which is a tone of politeness to the bishop?
I think great politeness to the bishop. Perhaps it could have been all the more strenuously said, but I think she had some sort of respect for the bishop and now was wanting him to do something.
And from your interaction with Mrs. BAE, why do you suppose she didn't go to the police at this stage?
My sense of meeting with her was that she was very concerned about the welfare of her son, and her primary concern at that stage was his health, his well-being, and that Ridsdale be removed from places where he might have contact with young people. I'm not sure that I heard her mention anything about any police action or contact with the police.
And are we to understand that you asked of her the question, what can be done?
No, I didn't. I think I said, I'll do what I can do, what can be done. I'll see what can be done.
And in your mind, that was to report to the bishop and see what he would do?
Yes, that's right.
And of course, you accept that amongst the things that could have been done would have been immediately to remove Ridsdale from parish ministry. Do you accept that?
I couldn't do that.
No, you couldn't have done that, but the bishop could have done that, of course.
The bishop had that option to do that, yes.
Yes. And also, he, or indeed you, could have reported the matter to the police.
Yes, he could have.
And you could have.
Possibly could, but I was under the authority of the bishop to go and see this person, which I did. The person responsible, I think, in the diocese to take up these matters would have been the bishop or someone whom he asked. I wasn't asked to do that. There were no protocols at this time in the diocese, Your Honour. No written directives about how to handle these matters. Nothing to say about who should do what would happen. It was all, in some senses, ad hoc.
It was pretty obvious what should happen, though, wasn't it?
For whom the diocese?
Well, when you had a problem like this, it's pretty obvious that someone had to act and act quickly to remove him, wasn't it?
I think so, yes.
You didn't need a protocol to tell you that, did you?
I'm talking about protocols for how perhaps those of us working in the office should deal with matters.
Well,
there was no directives about that.
Well, what's being put to you is you didn't need a directive either. The matter was so serious that you should have been, as Mr. Stewart put it to you, he's suggesting you should have been banging on the bishop's
I
door.
directed with it straight on as soon as I was able to hand a note back I did that. I don't know whether the bishop was in town or was somewhere else at that stage. That's why a note would have been left on his desk.
Now, Father, did you hear the evidence of Father McKinnon earlier?
Yes, I did.
And you heard him say that there were failings in the church and how they dealt with these matters?
Yes.
Do you subscribe to that too?
Yes.
Do you accept there were failings?
Yes.
And when you look back, do you accept some responsibility for what you didn't do?
I accept some responsibility, but I think at that stage I thought my overriding responsibility was to the authority of mine, and I had faith and belief that that authority would take action.
And that was misplaced.
That authority didn't.
That was misplaced faith, wasn't it?
When I look back, it is, yes.
I have no further questions for Father McDermott.
Does anyone else have any questions of Father McDermott?
Yes, I do, Your Honour.
Anyone else? No, very well.
Your Honour, please. Father McDermott, my name is Seckle. Amongst others, I appear on behalf of Helen Watson. If I could just ask you a question, please, in relation to Paul David Ryan, and more particularly, if I could take you, please, to page 1635 of your private hearing with the Commission, and more particularly at line 39, please. And if I could read it from line 139, you're asked the following question. I have the impression your initial experiences with Ryan left you as not liking him so much. Answer, not liking him and wanting to keep a bit of distance, not because of anything that I would have known initially, but he wasn't my sort of person, I suppose. If I can just ask you what aspects of his personality, behaviour or manner was it that caused you concern at that time?
He had, for me, a very arrogant appearance about himself. He'd been studying elsewhere in the seminary in another state, came in at the same time as I started, and then tried to just let us know that he was superior to the rest of us, knew many more things about theology, about life, and that he was above and beyond those of us who started at the same time. So that initial impression of him stayed with me.
Yes, and was there any aspect other than that, his aspect of his conduct or his sexual manner or mannerisms that caused you concern at that time?
No.
Commission, please.
A couple of matters. If it please, I appear for BPD, and my name is David O'Brien. I just want to follow on from the same page of the transcript. At line 27, you say you presume sexual. We were asked, you presume sexual, did you? And you say that's with hindsight. I should say I think there had been some words during so many times where someone may have said to me that Paul had sort of suggested that they go and have a massage together. Do you recall who said that to you?
No, I think it was said while walking on from university back to the college that someone had said, Ryan had made a suggestion to someone else to go and have a massage.
And if I'm not necessarily asking you to disclose a name if you wish to put it on a piece of paper, but do you recall who that was who said that to you?
No.
All right. Then just over the page you were asked some questions about, or you answered at line 15, the only reference I would have had was knowledge of that time that a massage was suggested, but then later on I heard information that he was part of Ronald Pickering's friends and stayed with me. And you asked some questions about Ronald Pickering. Could I just ask you, what were your concerns in relation to an association with Ronald Pickering at that stage?
I think that there was speculation or talk going about that Pickering, I suppose what I would have heard was perhaps active in a homosexual way. I didn't know that directly, but I think that was conversation.
Well, further on, you're asked about rumours and you said, well, I heard rumours that there were young males going into the presbytery. That's in reference to Ronald Pickering. This would have been at the time he was in Gardenvale, and the presumption or what had said about that was that there was something happening there. And do you recall from those rumours the age of the young males, or that there was a concern in relation to them being underage?
I think they were young, but I couldn't tell you if they were under 18 or what age.
But there were concerns about that relationship, that there was an inappropriate relationship at least with young males?
I don't know about relationship. I heard that young males were entering the presbytery.
And hanging around the presbytery to that effect?
I imagine that, yes.
And did those rumours then continue on in relation to Father Pickering's relationship with the clergy in Ballarat?
I didn't know of a relationship with Ballarat priests.
And what about any...
Apart from Ryan.
Right, and what about with Bishop Mulcairns and Pickering?
I think they may have had some study together.
Would it be fair to say that... I cut you off, you were going to say more?
Would have known each other from meetings, especially education meetings at that stage.
And during your time as Bishop Mulcairns' secretary, were you aware of a, shall we say, a cordial relationship between Bishop Mulcairns and Father Pickering?
No.
Were you aware that Father Ryan had a relationship of what's been described as a confessor, Father Pickering being one of his confessors or confidants, during your time with Bishop Mulcairns?
No.
All right. And just if I could ask you some documents about some documents during your time as secretary, which, according to your CV, was from January 1985 to January 1990.
Yes.
Could I ask that Father McDermott be provided with the document behind tab 50? Please. This is a letter from Bishop Mulcairns to Father Paul David Ryan when he's in the US of A, dated 16 August 1985. Do you recall this type of letter, or were you involved in the preparation of a letter like this as Bishop Mulcairns' secretary?
No.
Can you recall...
His own correspondence.
It's his own correspondence, is that what you said?
Yes.
Yes, and can you tell that from the typeface, etc., that it's on his own typewriter, or is that, how do you deduce that?
Because that was his usual practice.
What do you mean by that?
Normally, initially he would do all of his own preparation, typing of his own letters. Sometime later he may have got his personal assistant to do that, but it would be more likely that he would have typed this letter up himself.
And do you recall any of the matters that are referred to in page 2 being discussed with you, particularly in relation to the introduction of a ministry to priests program in the diocese?
I knew that that program was being considered and then introduced, yes.
And do you recall whether it dealt with any of the emerging sexual or clergy abuse matters that the priests were starting to become apparent in the late 80s?
Not particularly, but the program was there to try and get or support priests to keep deepening their emotional development, their psychological development. So it wasn't, from what I could see, specifically to deal with psychosexual matters.
All right. And just in the second paragraph of that page, you'll refer references to Father Ryan's stay in the United States. The second sentence, my motivation for releasing you at this stage was rather in order to enable you to sort out your own position and to be free of unnecessary strain. Would you have known what those matters were about?
Not particularly, but I knew at some stage that there had been terrible inappropriate action on behalf of Ryan soon after his ordination. So in my mind it would be perhaps trying to deal with those matters.
And what did you know about those matters after?
I didn't know those matters for a fact. It's just my intuition with it.
What did you know about those matters straight after his ordination?
Sometime later, would have been some years later, I'd heard that there had been some incident or incidents, and presumably of a sexual nature, although I don't know that I was told that.
All right. And just the next document is document 51, which is a minutes of the meeting of consultors. Did you attend that as the Bishop's secretary, do you recall?
I attended it as the secretary to the consultants.
And so are these your notes, which the Bishop then signs?
Oh, it's my bad handwriting, yes.
Okay. So do you recall the discussion there on page 2? That Father Ryan, wonderful Paul David Ryan, do you see that?
Yes.
It says Father Ryan wrote to the Bishop on 1 August offering his availability to return to the parish work in February 1986. The consultants asked the Bishop to write to Father Ryan indicating he would be welcome back. Do you recall that?
I don't recall it, but I accept that happened.
And would that have happened is it likely that there was a discussion about his suitability at that stage?
The Bishop was likely to say something about his suitability to come back, just how much detail, or whether he spoke to any others about what had happened in that time while he was away, I don't know.
Yes, well, there's another...
This was fairly on when I was secretary, so it's just some months after I'd taken over.
Yes, well, there's another letter on the 25th of September. It's along similar lines. I won't take you to that for time, but do you recall there's another meeting under tab 53? Which confirms under 1986 staffing, Father Paul Ryan will be available from March 1986. That's in your handwriting again, is it?
That's right, yes.
And similar, you would have recalled a discussion that he's available?
I can't recall any discussions about that.
All right. I just want to take you to some other documents in relation to then the appointment we see at tab 57. That seems to be in a slightly different handwriting. Is that your handwriting or a different pen, perhaps?
That's my handwriting.
And you'll see there that there's an appointment for Penshurst, and this is the meeting from the 30th of December 1988.
Yes.
And then the next two documents I'd like to ask you about, which is correspondence between Reverend Mulcairns and Paul David Ryan about the Penshurst appointment. Do you recall Paul David Ryan having some, shall we say, reservations about his appointment to Penshurst?
Not that I know of.
All right. Well, could I take you to this letter? Because this is a letter, this is behind tab 58. You'll see that's a letter from Paul David Ryan on the St Joseph's Penshurst letterhead, addressed to Reverend Mulcairns. And in the third paragraph it says, I've decided not to go to the US this year. I've attended for holidays. I have a really noble motive, cost too much, but I also decided I needed time to think and so removed the temptation, all in the light of our last discussion. I do appreciate some of the pressures you're under at the moment, but with those guys who are on sick leave, etc., so it is better for me to hang loose and see how the Spirit moves us. I'm not so sure I have changed my assessment of me being a parish priest or PP here at Penshurst, but if I can survive, so it can be for the time being, non in vero. Likewise, read some of the other issues I raised with you. Do you recall in your role as Bishop Secretary or in any other role what those issues that were likely to have been raised between Paul David Ryan and Bishop Mulcairns?
No.
Did Bishop Mulcairns ever discuss those matters with you, to your knowledge?
Most unlikely, and I can't recall that to have happened.
If you were the Bishop's Secretary, would you have received this letter coming in the mail?
No.
It would have gone...
I had the practice of opening his own mail.
All right. And reading those matters now, does it somewhat concern you that there you have Paul David Ryan himself talking about temptation in the light of his history?
Yes, that would.
And if I could just take you to the next one, because it's probably more clearer again, which is document number 59. Again, the second paragraph that says, as I last spoke to you, I feel Penshurst could do well with someone other than me as pastor. I threw my hat into the ring for that reason. I'd spoken to Paddy Bowen and felt that that was sufficient indication. I had a good chat with Paddy about what he felt the best thing for me to do. Could I pause there? Do you recall discussions from Paul David Ryan with anyone that he might not have been suited to that vocation?
No.
All right. His initial reaction was that he voiced before me was wondering whether I was the right sort of pastoral work that is in a parish. And then he goes on, now I must realise, etc. Do determine possibilities here in the diocese, so on, that I accept that. But I am worried for reasons that I've talked to you about before. Principally, I know I have to carefully look at the whole structure of where and how I work and focus myself. That is a legacy that you helped me discover with John Kinane so long ago. Does that trigger any memory of any discussions the Bishop may have had with you about the suitability of Paul David Ryan?
No.
Reading it now, do you understand that that was significant concerns that Paul David Ryan was perhaps expressing about his own suitability for a pastoral ministry as opposed to some other form of ministry?
Yes, I think you could read that.
And he says, I suppose that is why I applied to Warrnambool, because I know the circumstances of work there, etc. That is not a comment on Brian's appointment, which I think is an excellent choice. However, what Paddy said to me weighs heavily on my mind, and I wonder if I really shouldn't be looking to another expression of ministry, if not possible here for the time, then back in the US where you know the particular ministries are a feature. Do you see again that he is, in a sense, asking or requesting that the Bishop consider a non-pastoral ministry for him?
I think he was asking for an escape route.
Yes. From what?
Mr. O'Brien, where are we going? Because we can read these documents
Yes,
ourselves.
I just wanted to check, because he was the Secretary, whether he was aware of that, and that there was the same thing can be said in relation to the next document. I'll just ask.
Right. I think we now understand the story.
Yes. I'll simply ask him if he's seen the next document, which is the document behind number 60. It's on a slightly different letterhead. Is that something you may have seen in your role as Bishop Secretary?
No.
All right. You finished in 1990, so you wouldn't have been aware of further correspondence between Ryan and Pickering after that?
No.
All right. Thank you.
Is there anyone else?
Father McDermott, my name's
Need to
Stanton.
find a microphone.
Father McDermott, my name's Stanton. As you know, I'm your counsel.
Yes.
Father McDermott, when you started your role as Bishop Secretary in 1985, you were 31 years old, is that right?
That's correct, yes.
You just spent 2 years studying canon law at the University of Ottawa.
Yes.
As a 31-year-old secretary to the bishop, what was your seniority relative to the consultors and the bishop?
I was a support person, really there to take minutes, organise things, but I didn't have a deliberative voice. That was chiefly with those consultants who the bishop had appointed to do that. My appointment was not included in that.
You've already given evidence that you didn't receive any training in relation to allegations of sexual abuse, is that so?
That's correct, yes.
And during your time as Bishop Secretary, there were no policies or procedures in place, is that right?
No written policies, no procedures, very little verbal instruction, if any.
And having said that, your evidence is that you take responsibility for the management of what happened with the complaint made by BAE. That's correct, isn't it?
That's correct.
And what should you have done differently?
I think the matter was of sufficient importance that I should have been asking the bishop to take immediate action and keep on talking to him about that. That he didn't do it perhaps was incumbent that I should have taken other action.
You're aware now, aren't you, that in fact there was a request made for Ridsdale to step down in early April 1988, and that request was made by Bishop Mulcairns without consulting the consultors. You're aware of that, aren't you?
That's possibly correct, yes.
Just lastly, I just like to take you to...
Sorry, you say that a request was made by the bishop, and what happened? I'm not sure I'm bringing that into context. You say a request was made, then what happened?
It was noted in the meeting on the 21st of June 1988 that it had been necessary to remove Ridsdale from the parish ministry.
So you say that's evidence of the request. Is that what you're saying?
There's, behind tab 43 of the Ridsdale tender bundle, there's a letter from Ridsdale to Bishop Mulcairns confirming the request made by Bishop Mulcairns for Ridsdale to step down last Monday. That's dated the 11th of April 1988.
You say that's evidence that it was made without speaking with any consultant.
There's a further letter of the 18th of May 1988 from Bishop Mulcairns to Monsignor Nolan, where it was noted, where Bishop Mulcairns writes, this is tab 45 of the Ridsdale tender bundle, I felt that I should let you know that I have little option but to implement the change in question. As it has been done, it did not therefore seem to be reasonable to ask consultants to travel to Ballarat for a special meeting. That's tab 45 of the Ridsdale tender.
That's the extent of the evidence.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, Your Honour.
Yeah. We don't know who spoke to who about what.